Hey everyone, and welcome to my review for A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1 Episode 6, The Morrow. And here we are at the end of Season 1, which was way too short in my opinion, but a very fun and refreshing experience that's really managed to revitalize people's love for Game of Thrones. This episode had a big change of pace from the last few, which makes sense of course since it's the end of the story and everything's winding down. But as a result, although I did like it, I have to say I didn't enjoy it as much as past episodes. But for now, let's get into the positives, starting with Baelor's funeral scene, when Sir Duncan tries to offer his sympathies to Valar, but the boy is too upset, remarking that his father had the makings of a great king, so why would the gods take his life but spare Dunk before telling him to leave? This was very similar to the books, with much of it word for word, though Valar is more specific about his father's age, saying he was 39 when he died. Then there was the flashback scene where Sir Arlen tells Dunk the story of the penny tree, and how in his home village young boys would nail their pennies into a tree before going off to war and take them down if they came back. And how the hard part was finding space for new pennies, meaning many of those young boys never returned. This later inspired Dunk to nail his own penny into the elm tree where he slept before departing Ashford Meadow. It was pretty funny that Sir Arlen seemed to die while speaking, but then came back to life, saying a true knight always finishes his stories. Although this flashback wasn't in the Dunk and Egg books, it does relate to a part of the main novels, specifically the 5th book, A Dance with Dragons, when Jaime Lannister visits the village of Pennytree and wonders why there's pennies nailed into an oak tree. I also enjoyed the tent scene where they're honoring Sir Humphrey Beesbury and we see a beehive covering his casket. This is another scene not in the books, but it was quite interesting having Dunk confront Darren, only for the prince to make a compelling argument for taking Aegon as a squire, since, as Darren put it, Aerion wasn't always a monster. He was once a glad child who liked fishing, but at some point got corrupted during his royal upbringing. So perhaps Dunk should take Egg with him to avoid the potential trappings of the Targaryen lifestyle. This is then hinted at in the next scene when Egg contemplates killing Aerion, who was sleeping nearby, only to be stopped by his father, who was unknowingly sitting in the corner. Although Aerion is evil and in many ways deserves it, not everyone would actually consider killing their brother in cold blood, and the fact Aegon did means there is some measure of violence and rage within him. Another great scene was Egg telling Dunk his father gave permission to serve as a squire, and so was granted Chestnut as his horse before saying there are 9 kingdoms, not 7, which was a funny line but technically not true. The realm is named after the 7 kingdoms which existed when the Targaryens originally invaded. After the conquest, they split some of those realms to create 9 territories, which included the Crownlands, Riverlands, and Iron Islands as their own regions. In the far past, the Iron Islands and Riverlands actually were kingdoms of their own, but the Crownlands never was, and none of them were individual kingdoms at the time of the Targaryen invasion. So Egg is wrong in this case, but it was still pretty funny. Some of this scene was similar to the books, like the mention of visiting Dorne for the puppet shows as a means to find Tanzel. But a fun little addition was the shot of Sir Arlen riding with them as they departed, before turning in another direction, leaving Dunk and Egg to pursue their own adventures. We then got a fun final scene of Maekar looking for Egg as his party leaves Ashford, meaning the boy snuck off without permission to squire for Duncan. This was pretty funny, but a bit of a departure from the source material. Technically, it's possible this happened in the books as well, since Maekar never actually told Dunk face to face that Egg could serve him. The prince just walks away after Dunk makes his point about why being a Hedge Knight's squire might be good for the boy. However, the implication in the books is that Maekar later gave permission directly to Egg, as evidenced by the fact no search parties are ever sent for them, and they later meet several family members of Egg, like his brother Aemon the Maester and great-uncle Bloodraven, none of whom mention anything about the boy leaving without permission. Maekar also gifted Egg his signet ring to use in case he ever got into trouble so he could prove he's a Targaryen, all of which gives the impression Maekar did in fact give permission for Egg to join Duncan. And the last positive I'll mention is that all the Trial of 7 combatants looked battered and beat down throughout the episode, which gave a sense of realism and consequence for what they went through, which not every show is willing to portray. Moving on to the negatives, I have to say I didn't much like that they basically outright said Dunk wasn't knighted, whereas it's a bit more subtle in the books. To be fair, upon rereading the Dunk and Egg books, all the hints of Dunk not being knighted become a lot more obvious. But I remember that when I first read it, I really wasn't sure, and the clues seemed a lot more vague. I kind of wish they had kept that same vibe in the show, only hinting at it, instead of basically outright saying it in the flashback scene. I guess there's still some ambiguity since Arlen wasn't completely dead by the end of the scene, and so could have still knighted Dunk in his final moments. But realistically, I think Dunk outright asking why he wasn't knighted, and Arlen being so close to death, made it very clear he wasn't knighted. I also have to say, I'm not sure I like that they changed the implication from the books that Maekar really agreed for Egg to serve as Dunk's squire. The final scene was definitely funny, but it just seemed like an unnecessary change that may have unforeseen consequences in the future. Lastly, I'll say I wasn't a big fan of the jazz music at the beginning, and the 16 Tons song during the end credits. I actually really like 16 Tons, but it didn't feel fitting for this type of show. Now, for the top 5 moments, I'll start with Sir Raymond Fossaway buying Sweetfoot for Dunk, once again proving to be a loyal and thoughtful friend. What an awesome character he became. This scene wasn't in the books, where he was also a good friend to Dunk, but the show version of Raymond Fossaway has more depth and in many ways was more interesting and enjoyable. I also like that Dunk let him keep Sweetfoot, as that's probably best for the horse, who will have a comfortable life in an apple orchard, instead of the potentially dangerous life of a hedge knight on the road. For the 4th best moment, I'll stay with Raymond Fossaway as he greeted and comforted Dunk after the funeral, revealing he's been kicked out of Stefan's tent before showing off his new green apple sigil, indicating he'll start his own branch of the family. We then find out he's married to Lady Rowan, who is supposedly pregnant with his child, though Dunk knows she's the prostitute that was with Sir Manfred Dundarian, and so if she really is pregnant, it's likely a Dundarian child in her belly. All this was not in the books, and on the one hand, I was happy for Raymond that everything seemed to work out for him and he seems content, even talking about starting his own orchard and cider business for his father. But on the other hand, I feel bad that his wife's tricking him and taking advantage of him, possibly making him raise a child that isn't his, and who may end up inheriting what he builds, meaning his actual bloodline may not continue. At the number 3 spot, I chose Dunk's first meeting with Maekar, where he talks about the whispers that will surround them both, accusing them of killing Baelor and harming the realm. Dunk is racked with guilt, and so ends up turning down Maekar's offer to serve at Summerhall and have Egg continue as his squire. Although much of this is similar to the source material, they split the book content into 2 scenes, and added the part about Dunk initially refusing to take Egg and leaving. Which brings me to the 2nd best moment of the night, which is Dunk's second meeting with Maekar, where they finish the book scene by having him agree to take Egg as his squire on the condition he can continue as a hedge knight, so the boy can learn humility and the struggles of the small folk. Just like in the books, Maekar resists the idea, saying Egg is blood of the dragon and not meant for the life of a peasant, only for Dunk to respond that both Darren and Arian were raised as proper royals, implying that perhaps that's why there's such disappointments, and that Egg might prosper if raised in a different, less privileged environment. In the show, Maekar says Egg's his last son before leaving, whereas in the books he says nothing and simply walks away. And finally, we get to the best moment of the night, which for me is the opening scene of Lionel Baratheon and his maester tending to Dunk after the trial of 7. The maester claims Dunk is dying, but Lionel shoos him away and says he's a shit maester, and not to believe what he says. Lionel then offers Dunk a place at Storm's End, which is an amazing opportunity, but Dunk seems to be in no mood to accept such generosity. Lionel then badmouths Baelor and the Targaryens, which offends Dunk, causing Lionel to rant about how Baelor risked nothing and the gods don't favor a fraud. Dunk then asked why the gods favor him, another hint he wasn't really knighted, but Lionel says his condition is not favor, but mockery. None of this was in the books, just like most of Lionel's scenes throughout the season, but he ended up being such a fun and interesting character that all of these are wonderful additions to the story. There were no kills or fights in this episode, so I'll go straight to the best line of the night, going with Lionel Baratheon making an interesting though somewhat unfair observation as Duncan asked him to speak of Baelor with respect, replying, "Fuck that and fuck you. I fought for you. Harding, Beesbury, the fucking Apple Boy, we fought for you. Your prince fought for you against men sworn to protect him. He risked nothing, and the gods don't favor a fraud." So, we've reached the end of Season 1, and although I very much enjoyed this show and liked the finale, for me it was one of the weaker episodes this season. Possibly because of the slower pace and sense of sadness throughout, which, story-wise, does make sense, but was a drastic change from the last two very exciting and fast-paced episodes. So I'm gonna give it a respectable 7 out of 10, and a strong 9 out of 10 for the season overall. And that's it for my review of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1 Episode 6. The Morrow. But what did you guys think? Did you like the change of Egg leaving without Maekar's permission? What do you think of Lionel ranting against Baelor and the Targaryens? And did you enjoy Raymond Fossaway's ending? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to check out my other A Song of Ice and Fire videos related to the show, like the history of Baelor Breakspear, the history of Daeron II, the spoiler-filled complete history of Sir Duncan the Tall, and spoiler-free prelude to A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. All these videos and more will be linked in the comments below, and be on the lookout for the Season 1 recap I'll be releasing in the next couple weeks. Although we're nearly done with Game of Thrones content for now, I'll be back with more reviews and lore videos for House of the Dragon Season 3, and whenever A Night of the Seven Kingdoms Season 2 comes out. So for now, I want to thank you all for watching these reviews, and I hope to see you next time. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Sir Rick Lone, Barachado, Raj the Jar, and Kristen Greeneyes of the Company of the Cat. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.